So I've had quite literally one person go, where's the video on the Red Bull brake stuff thing that's been talked about at the minute? It hasn't been done, clearly. Until now, that is, because there's been a lot of confusion around this grey area exploit that's been closed off with the new technical directive recently, and it's got people wondering if the technical directive is the reason that Red Bull hasn't won a race in a while. I forget how many races it's been now. And that's because the internet loves a bit of drama. It loves speculation. It loves putting 2 and 2 together and getting 9. It also loves shouting on social media that such and such a driver no longer has a rocket ship that's super dominant, and now he can't win a race to save his life. Car merchant, etc. The usual. But where the speculation lies here is that this technical directive has blown up in a way that it's caused so many to assume that somebody on the grid might not be doing something that's totally within the spirit of the rulebook, but by the letter of the rulebook, it's totally legal. Until now, that is. The old saying of, it doesn't say here that I can't, which is something I've said so many times on here when talking about all of the hacks and, well, cheats, if you want to call them that have been applied to Formula 1 cars since Colin Chapman started sticking wings on his Lotuses in 1968. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen, because today we're getting technical. I can only hope that I can translate it all properly. So let's dive into this whole rumoured team using asymmetric braking thing and why everybody is tying the ban to Red Bull's changing fortunes over the last few months. The recent change to the rule was the following. The braking system must be designed so that within each circuit, the forces applied to the brake pads are of the same magnitude and act as opposing pairs on a given brake disc. The FIA recently added the words, any system or mechanism that can systematically or intentionally produce asymmetric braking torques for a given axle is prohibited. They love their long sentences, don't they? And this is all tied to brake balance. When a car is approaching the corner, the driver uses his left foot to slow it down for that particular corner, like turn 3 at Silverstone or that left-hander at the end of the massive straight at Kota. As the driver hits the brakes, all 4 corners, so the brakes on all 4 wheels, are activated. The driver can shift the brake balance around as he sees fit, and you'll see it pop up on the screen on their steering wheels when they do fiddle with it. Send the balance too far forward, you'll lock the fronts and the car won't turn, so you slide straight off into the gravel and you're done. Too far back and the rears will lock and you'll spin off into the gravel and you're done. Verstappen was complaining about this a lot at Hungary. He was shifting the brake balance back a few clicks and could not get the car to rotate at all. Now these hybrids will have brake migration, which is something else, and that's just black magic to me, so I won't bother going into that. And this is the other thing about brake balance. You'd think that shifting it forward would be better for the turn-in, but it's not the case. I don't get it myself either. So the wording of the new rule that the FIA has published has implied that at least one team on the grid has been doing something iffy. Okay, maybe not iffy because that in itself implies that somebody's flaunting the letter of the rulebook. Gary Anderson is somebody that has looked through many rulebooks in his time, and in his piece a couple of days ago for the race, he said that up until this new rule was written, there wasn't anything that explicitly forbid having a torque assist system, although there was a piece in the rules that outlawed things like McLaren's fiddle brake from 1997. In this next bit, you're going to hear the name Neil Oatley. Not Neil Oatley, Steve Nichols. Steve Nichols came up with the idea for the fiddle brake. I'm sorry, I have failed you all. And what's been speculated at the minute is that somebody, namely Red Bull because of their change in fortunes recently, might have had a fiddle brake without actually having a fiddle brake. This was devised by Neil Oatley while sat in the bath of all places, and not, as people seem to keep claiming online, an Adrian Newey invention. And this pedal allowed for the McLaren drivers at that time, Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard, to generate some extra turn-in on corner entry, and could later use the system as a form of traction control on corner exit. It cost McLaren 50 quid to build the system. They attached a new master cylinder to the rear, hooked it up with some hose, and added a second brake pedal so that when you braked normally, the car pulled up, well, as normal. But when they used the second brake pedal, one of the rear wheels was slowed down independently of the other one and worked much like a tank does when it stops one side of its tracks. It yawed the car around into the corner and improved the turn-in. So with this system, McLaren could then run less wings so they would gain a little bit more in straight line speed. It gained them time through 1997, but when the MP413 turned up in 1998, it utterly dominated for the first 2 races before being banned. So there was nothing about torque steer being banned, and anything to do with the front axle is about the steering and how you're not allowed to run things like DAS from 2020. The rear axle rules completely outlaw 4-wheel steering, something that Benetton had played with in the early 90s before that was banned. But, and this is something that a lot of people haven't noticed, there is something about asymmetric braking being banned in the 2026 regulations. In the first lot of the rules published in June this year, there is a line about asymmetric braking and it being banned. So Anderson reckons that this is just the FIA bringing one rule forward to stop people getting on top of it now, while they still can. Using some sort of a torque steer system on a modern Formula 1 car can be of some use, and that's to do with the ground effect that the cars are using. Unlike the Formula 1 cars from, say, the 90s, early 2000s up to the end of 2021, the 2022 onwards regulations see the cars producing downforce through ground effect rather than the wings, or topside aero. As a result, the teams are going to be running less topside aero with the front and rear wings, because they are generating the downforce through the Venturi effect in the massive tunnels under the car. Basically, the faster the air going through those tunnels, the lower the pressure, the more downforce produced. That's the simple way of putting things anyway. So at slow speed, the cars aren't generating much downforce. I mean, that's been the case for decades, and the teams will always be finding the best way to compromise and balance the setup so they can optimize straight line speed and turning. So to go with some extreme examples here, if you're at Monza and you crank up the wings, you're going to be amazing through the 3 chicanes and the entrance to Parabolica, but the other cars will be blasting past you on the straight up Warp 10 because it's a track that's top speed dependent. Similarly, if you take all the wing off for Hungary, you're going to be tiptoeing around because you're going to have, well, less than no grip. So with the torque steering, you'll allow one brake to do more work as the car is starting to turn in, and you get almost like a handbrake turn effect. It's the fiddle brake without the second brake pedal. The way this team, if indeed a team has been doing this, is that they're thought to be using some sort of restrictor on the brake that they want to apply it to, so that the left or right rear brake, depending on where they're racing, will release slower than the other, if that makes any sense to you. So as the driver comes off the brakes into, say, La Source, which needs a good entry and exit to maximise the run down the hill, the left brake comes off as normal, but the right brake stays on a second, maybe 2 seconds longer, and that yaws the car around into the corner. So when you get on the power, the car should already be pointing in a straight line and off you go. Should, at least. I hope this is all making sense because I'm trying to cater to those that don't speak English as a first language as well as people that do. But to be honest, it's breaking my brain as well. Maybe I need more coffee. But Autosport in the last 24 hours, or 22 as it was at the time of writing this specific part of the script, has reported that the FIA has said that as far as they are aware, nobody is using such a system. And like Anderson had hypothesised, they are just future-proofing the regulations so that everybody is on the same wavelength and nobody was going to try anything silly between now and 2026. They also said that despite Anderson thinking to the contrary with his engineer's mind, they thought the wording in the rulebook was already sufficient enough to ban this kind of system anyway. So why does all this point to Red Bull being the ones running this kind of thing then? Let's look at the evidence. I mean, I use the term evidence very loosely because at the minute it all points towards coincidence. But as Gibbs Rule 12 says, no wait, Rule 12 was never date a co-worker. 23? No, that's don't mess with the Marine's coffee if you want to live. It was Rule 39. There's no such thing as a coincidence. In Australia, Verstappen retired with his right rear brake smoking more than Snoop Dogg as the brake caliper got stuck on, and it was like the car was trying to do a handbrake turn into every corner and pull to the right, which is what a fiddle brake or brake torque steer, whatever you want to call it, would do. And with it being on the right-hand side rear brake, it fueled that speculation that Red Bull might have been running something different that points towards this delayed braking system. With Melbourne also being right biased in terms of hard braking zones such as turns 1, 3 and 13, a delay brake would work well there. Now Perez had also crashed in qualifying with a brake related issue, so for both cars to have problems adds fuel to the right rear brake fire. In 2022, where Max again retired, both Red Bulls had suffered from a brake caliper taking too long to come off. Again, this fuels the speculation that this is something that's been going on for a while. But Mark Hughes at Motorsport magazine has written that it could be any of Red Bull, McLaren and even Mercedes that might have been doing something like this. Maybe he was scraping the bottom of the barrel when it came to McLaren and Mercedes, but Piastri did make some errors in the Hungarian Grand Prix, which might have been due to having the settings wrong, and Mercedes went from being all over the place at Spa in practice to end up finishing with a 1-2. Well, at least until it wasn't. But the system has also been said to help with tyre wear, something that Hamilton managed well at Silverstone while Lando couldn't, and George becoming the tyre whisperer at Belgium. Which then brings a question. Where the hell did Red Bull drop off to? Part of that is the law of diminishing returns. Red Bull nailed the new ground effect era regulations, and they won easily in 2022. Even easier still in 2023. And while 2024 started by the now customary 20 to 30 second wins in a couple of the opening rounds of the season, Verstappen is now struggling to make the podium at a couple of rounds now, later in the season, to the point where it looks like even Mercedes have overtaken them, with Russell winning one race and Hamilton two. Lando and Oscar both have a win to their name as well. But even so, seeing Red Bull be so fast for them to have been caught by the time the next race rolls around is a bit of a shock, because normally that sort of catch-up doesn't happen until the off-season. McLaren and Mercedes did something with some upgrades to see them go from behind Red Bull by about half a second a lap to being on the pace or just in front in the case of McLaren. Okay, maybe Red Bull hasn't lost pace per se, they've just lost that advantage, and now it's showing. No, I should say it's showing for now, because things might change again. Essentially, the other teams can find more time in one big chunk than Red Bull can. I read a stat somewhere that Mercedes found 1.3 seconds between last year's British Grand Prix and this year's British Grand Prix, while Red Bull found considerably less. But to be leapfrogged like that mid-season is crazy. But then I don't get any of this stuff. I've got an audio engineering degree rather than a degree in aerodynamical engineering and car stuff. Another part is, and I think I've talked about this on here before, is that Red Bull can't take bumps and curbs in the same way that some of the other cars can. If you watch the onboards from Hungary, Oscar and Lando were able to take more curb in the longer corners, such as the section after the chicane, while Max wasn't able to do that. And as such, the McLarens were a bit faster in that middle sector as they went on to take the 1-2 over the course of the Grand Prix. Even Hamilton's Mercedes, which over the last couple of years has been terrible on bumps and curbs, was able to do something that Max's car couldn't. Because the McLarens could open up the track more, they were faster, while the Red Bull suffered a bit, resulting in Max overdriving and getting frustrated. I did a video ages ago, and I actually don't remember when I did it, but I drove an F3 car around Barcelona showing what happens if you use every inch of the track instead of just staying within the white lines. So much time can be found, it's unreal, and if you can't get the car to do any of that, you're only ever going to be fighting a losing battle. So it's easy to think then that Red Bull's drop or stagnation in performance can be linked to this technical directive. If your car is built around a certain thing and then that thing is banned mid-season, it's going to hit you harder than it would for a team that's retrofitted it to the car. The banning of the F-duct mid-season would have hurt McLaren more than it would have hurt the other teams. The banning of a blown diffuser mid-season would have crippled Red Bull's performance because that 2011 car was completely built around having this particular thing, and they'd have to rebuild the entire car because the whole aero balance of the car was built around the blowy boy on the back. And with Red Bull supposedly having this fiddle brake 2.0, while the wording in the technical directive wasn't published until very recently, before the Belgian Grand Prix I believe it was, it's believed that at some point the FIA might have said to Red Bull, away from everybody else, look, we've got a sneaky suspicion that you're doing X, Y and Z. Or maybe somebody else in the paddock approached the FIA saying, hey, is this legal? Are we allowed to do this? So when Red Bull heard about either of these two scenarios, they quickly and quietly took the offending parts off to avoid any suspicion or any of the other teams accusing them of doing something untoward. I mean, what's that word? Is it projection? I mean, politicians do it all the time when you accuse somebody of doing the very thing that you are doing. So Red Bull takes the parts off when, say, McLaren asks about running a torque steer system and then goes, you can't do that, when they were doing it themselves. And prior to the Belgian Grand Prix, Red Bull had complained to the FIA about McLaren's brakes. At the 2001 Spanish Grand Prix, the FIA decided they were going to allow traction control again, this being off the back of the thought that one or two teams over the last couple of years were flat out cheating by running it. Jordan had run something through 1999 that bit them in the arse a couple of times, but through 2000 it was evident that the FIA couldn't police the whole having traction control thing. Ron Dennis at the time was of the opinion that traction control would harm Ferrari because of what they were allegedly running on their gearboxes or something to that effect. In typical Ron speak, TM, he reckoned that Ferrari would fall back into the clutches of McLaren because, well, now everybody's got traction control. But Ferrari didn't. They actually jumped ahead. L moment for Ron there. So after all of this, it might be that nobody was cheating after all. That nobody was actually running a torque braking fiddle brake 2.0 system, and this is all just the FIA making sure that rules were airtight prior to 2026. a rule that's just been added there for some extra clarification that just made sure that I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And this was all blown out of proportion because, well, welcome to the internet. But at the same time, it doesn't help that one team has suddenly stood still while two more teams have since overtaken them. But I guess it'll be wait and see until the weekend as to what happens. You know, summer break on a summer break, I guess. People need something to talk about, don't they? Get the clicks, get the ads, get the revenue, get the profit. But I'd like to know what you think. Is it just coincidence, or is something else afoot here? So then, a look into this whole thing about brake torque steer clarification in the rules of F1 and how, well, nobody might be cheating at all and, well, this was all for nothing. So if this has given you food for thought, or at the very least clarified some bits and pieces for you, then do like the video so I know I've done a good job. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks, as ever, go out to the rad lads at Patreon for the continued support. And if you want to help support me at a more personal level, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates, and other bits and bobs that you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks down there if you just want to buy me a coffee, and there's memberships if you just want a Patreon alternative. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.